What is going on, you lovely ladies and gentlemen of the world? I'm going to try to make this more succinct than I usually am, which isn't too hard because I usually ramble a lot. But this round table, let me tell you, I said earlier before this all started when I heard that it was going to happen, temper your expectations. Don't bring them too high. Don't get too optimistic. I doubt anything particularly amazing is going to happen. And even with those tempered, basically expecting nothing, I got nothing. What a complete... I wish I had watched something else and just looked at the bullet points afterwards, because this was pointless. Let me tell you why. I'm going to start with the announcements, because the announcements is what most people were there for. Season passes for every single game. Cool. Congratulations. 2 new characters, Leo and Nagoriyuki. Nagoriyuki being the black samurai that was shown off at the very beginning, the very first Guilty Gear reveal trailer. He's finally shown off. Now that I no longer care about the game, thanks for that. Arc system works, well done. But yeah, that's it. It's just season passes for everybody. Congratulations, y'all get more DLC. Yay. The most notable thing that was mentioned during the announcements is that 50% of Tekken 7's base is on Wi-Fi. That makes me not want to play Tekken 7. I'm not actually going to dodge it, but goddamn. The other thing that's kind of weird about it is that Harada keeps doubling down on this whole, like, guys, Tekken 7 uses rollback. Why do you keep asking for rollback? Okay, that's fine. Tekken 7 uses rollback. It doesn't feel like it. Like, you clearly did it wrong. So, give us rollback and give it to us right. How about that? Is that what you need to hear? Is that, like, Harada bugs me. He is the kind of person that can admit no wrongdoing and can never admit just to say, like, look, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Never. Fuck that guy. Anyway. So that, I mean, I don't even want to go into more specifics for the announcements because it's just not worth it. They don't mean anything. It's just more season passes, more DLC. No commitment to doing anything, to making any changes to your games that'll actually fucking matter. Except Tekken, because they did say that they're going to be working on the online to try and make it better. So I do have to give shoutouts to that. At least somebody's on the right path, but nobody else. Everybody else is just, here's some online tournaments that are going to suck because our netcode sucks, so you're not going to enjoy yourselves. Have fun in the American tournaments when you have West Coast to East Coast connections. Enjoy. Go fuck yourselves. I hate it. So let's just move on. So the round table. Number one, why did they spend like 10 minutes introducing themselves? I don't get that. Like, y'all got nameplates there. You show who you work for. We can all see that. If we care, we can go look it up later to learn more about you. We don't need to waste a very limited time period. They even said afterwards that there were some questions they didn't get to address because they went over time for some of the other questions. What did we miss? Maybe what we missed was something we all wanted to hear, but we didn't get to it. And that's one of the things they wasted time on. The second thing they wasted time on, the very first question. The first and the third questions were complete waste of time, and I'll explain why. The first question was how these devs decide what characters make it into their game. They spent like 15 minutes talking about this. I can tell you in 5 seconds. It's a mixture of who the devs want in the game and who is going to sell the game. That's it. It's no more complicated than that. There is nothing more in the game that you need to hear. That's exactly what it is. So we move on. They spent 15 minutes talking about this shit. Why? The third question, which was another complete, massive, utter waste of time. How players play the games. What controllers they use. Basically an arcade stick versus pad argument. Why? Why are we wasting time on this? The player base has shown whatever they want to play on, they're going to find out a way to play on it. That's it. You don't need to focus on this. You don't need to care about this. You don't need to design a game thinking like, oh, are only arcade stick users going to be able to do this? Are only pad users going to be able to do this? People are going to figure it out. Broly Legs can't even use his hands and he figured out how to play Street Fighter. People are going to find a fucking way. Stop wasting our time. For fuck's sake. Future of crossplay. This was the second question, and what should have been an important one, but instead they sidestepped the issue, they sidestepped responsibility entirely, and initially it sounds good. It sounds right? Basically, all that they said is that we really want to do this, but there are technical issues. We have to get approval from all of the first-party hardware owners. Basically just saying like, oh, this is just really, we really want to, but it's really difficult. So, we want to and we hear you, but we're not going to do it because it's difficult. And like I said, the reasoning they had, which that's not, like, I am grossly oversimplifying a lot of my things to make it as bitchy as possible. Understand that. I really want you to understand that. That if you want to hear their exact responses, you should go to the video yourself and actually listen to them. But that's essentially boiled down to a gross oversimplification to make them sit in the worst light possible. That's where I'm coming from. But that was essentially their reasoning, is that, like, we want to do this, but it's just, we need first-party approval as well. Now, again, initially that sounds right. Like, oh yeah, I never really thought about that aspect, never thought that they need to get Microsoft and Sony, Nintendo, all in the same boat, all on board. But then you sit there and you just think for half of a second, wait a minute. Power Rangers Battle for the Grid is a very low-key fighting game. I've never heard anything but good. I've never heard anything negative about it. Whenever anybody talks about it, they only have good things to say. And that game has fully functional crossplay between all three of the major consoles and PC. Even has Google Stadia in there. And I checked their website really quick just to double check to make sure I wasn't talking about my ass about that. Like, maybe, for all I know, maybe the Nintendo Switch version doesn't get cross. I don't know. I wanted to make sure. They even feature the ability to migrate your online progression to a new console. Like, everything that you could want from crossplay, Power Rangers Battle for the Grid has. Now, we have a roundtable featuring the likes of Capcom, Arc System Works, Namco Bandai, Koei Tecmo, the heaviest hitters in the fighting game community, sitting there saying, oh, but it's so hard for the logistical side of it. And then Power Rangers Battle for the Grid is sitting all over here off on the sidelines like, motherfucker, what? We did it. We don't even have half of your resources. We don't even have a 10th, probably not even a 50th of your resources. And we did it. The hell are you talking about? So that ultimately became my entire impression of that. So once again, just sidestepping the issue, sidestepping responsibility. Basically, to me, it's that kind of PR speak. That's like, it's meant to placate, but also to commit to nothing. So that later on, if the issue crops up again, like, basically they just want people to stop talking. They want people to shut up, to let it go, to sit there and wait and eventually forget about it. And then they'll just never bring it up again. And if they do, they can just be like, well, we never said we were going to do it. We just said we wanted to. That kind of thing. That's what it seems like to me. So, I mean, again, it's just something we're going to have to sit back and see, but it's one of those things that just rings hollow. We'll find out. So then the last question they talk about, simplification of fighting games. The perceived simplification of fighting games. Perceived, they say. It's not perceived. It's blatant. Now, one of them made a good point. I can't remember who was talking at the particular time, but there is a difference between making a game simpler and making a game just flat out easier. Now, to be fair, if you make a game simpler, it's going to be easier. That's just a simple fact of life. But that is not necessarily a bad thing. One of the things that I have always harped on for, like, Guilty Gear specifically, or any game that features it, mashing to tech. That's just stupid. There's no reason for that to exist, especially when you have the ability to continue combos that aren't quote-unquote real, solely because you didn't mash hard enough to tech. That is a stupid mechanic that should not exist in fighting games. Removing that makes the game simpler. Removing that makes the game easier. I don't think anybody would argue that that is not a positive change to a fighting game. So they are correct in a sense, but the other thing too is that, like, so Grand Blue Fantasy Versus did it right. That is simplification to me done right. They made it so that you can do every character's special moves in the game without knowing how to do a single, I guess, proper fighting game motion. But there are drawbacks to it. Your skills go on cooldown for a time because you didn't use a real motion for it. That's a good way to handle it. You are putting yourself at a disadvantage for not learning, but you're also not punished right away. You're able to go in and play the game more or less decently well enough that you can learn it without having to just sit and grind execution in training mode for hours. That's a good way to respond to it. That is the only example that I can think of off the top of my head of all the things fighting games have done recently to quote-unquote simplify their games that actually succeeded at simplifying it, but did not detract from the overall quality of the game. Auto combos? Those don't make a game better. BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, removing like 60% of every character's moveset, does not make the game better. It doesn't make it easier either. Anybody can look at BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle and be like, no, this game is not easy. All that you have to do is learn how to sandwich somebody and run 50-50 mix-up, and they can't do anything about it. They can't touch you. That game is not easy to play in any way, shape, or form. Actually, I should flip that around. The game is very easy to play. All that you need to know is how to use one mechanic, and you've basically mastered the entire game, but it doesn't make it easy. Right? Because you can't defend from that. I don't know, I'm really poorly wording this, so I'm just going to move on. Hopefully you kind of sort of get the gist of what I'm trying to say, and I don't care enough to ensure that I'm saying it in the proper way, because it's BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle. And so, then they go on. Oh no, I skipped one, my bad. There was one other question, and I just completely skipped it. I'll go into it, because this is the one that I think had some decent points to make. But then another thing that they talked about at the end of, like the simplifying fighting games, is how they need to balance being able to draw in a new player base on top of keeping the old player base. And how, from a competitive standpoint, it's basically impossible for a new player to come in and make an impact. Now, to me, that speaks toward these devs having absolutely no awareness whatsoever of the competitive community of their games. Because every single game that I have ever paid attention to on a tournament level has had a small subset of players that started with that game, that only started, maybe not started fighting games, but only started going to tournaments, playing competitively because of that game, and became heavy hitters. They went on to win tournaments. Fenrich and Ryusei both were basically brand new to the BlazBlue series, I think in Chrono Phantasma, or like maybe Continuum Shift, but they started in BlazBlue themselves. And in the very last time that BlazBlue was featured at EVO, they were the grand finalists. They came in, they took over. They popped off. It's not impossible for people to come in and succeed at a perceived difficult fighting game. That was just a stupid argument to make, and I hate them for doing it. But so then let me just move on to the last point, because this is again the one that I think they actually... the fighting game user experience overall and how to make it better. Now here's the problem. They basically dedicated their entire time talking about this question to talking about fighting game AI, which, don't get me wrong, is something worth talking about. Fighting game AI has largely just been completely unchanged for the entire lifespan of fighting games. It is just essentially what percentage of the time is the AI going to read your inputs and body you accordingly. That's essentially, like, you can basically boil the entire difficulty system down to that. You raise the difficulty, they're going to read your inputs more often, and they're going to destroy you for it. They're going to pick a faster move, they're going to pick an invincible move, whatever. That's essentially what fighting game AI boils down to. That definitely needs improvement. Because there are people who, they play fighting game, they'll go and they'll play Mortal Kombat, and they'll only play the story, and they'll never play online against a single person. And for that kind of experience, fighting game AI is fine where it is. Because they're not there to try to learn how to get competitive. They're not there to try to learn the nuances of the battle system, all of that stuff. But if you want to learn how to play the game to be able to eventually play against new people, the AI is worthless. It is a completely pointless waste of time to try to play against the AI, because you learn nothing useful from them. You just have to dive into the deep end of the pool, which is basically saying just jump online and play against people and get your ass handed to you over and over again. That's the only option you have. And that was another thing. So they are correct that the fighting game AI could definitely use some improvements, but it surprised me just how much time they spent talking about specifically that, because they didn't talk about how bad netcode ruins the game. That's going to ruin the user experience. They don't talk about inadequate tools teaching their players how to even prepare to play against other people. Tekken, specifically, I even called that out, and nobody called Harada out on it. Surprise, surprise. Just overall, like, they just didn't talk about the majority of things that actually need to be improved to improve the user experience. And The most important ones being accessibility to matches, which is something that crossplay kind of sort of deals with, but good netcode. Having better netcode widens the parameters for who you can connect with. And there was no talk whatsoever about fighting game netcode throughout the entire thing. Like, that's probably arguably the most important aspect that could be talked about right now with the current status of the world. And they didn't say a goddamn word about it. It just blows my mind. Let's see. Do I have anything else? Nope, that was basically it. So yeah, it was just... I'm not sure. Maybe these developers were given, like the topics they were going to talk about so that they could kind of prepare their responses. But if they weren't, I think they should. Because it might allow them... Number one, it would allow them to kind of not ramble quite as much, stay on point, and ensure that all the questions get asked that they want to have asked. But at the same time, it gives them the ability to think it through more. Because if they don't have the time to think it through, inevitably, all you're really going to get are very surface level, very simple responses that are not going to cover the entire issue. That's just how it's going to be. You don't have time to think. You need time to think things through and to be able to respond accordingly. But at the same time, it continues to kind of solidify that, like, these devs, it just doesn't feel like they understand why people play fighting games in the first place. Why people are not that satisfied with fighting games right now in general. Which is scary, because these are the people that are making the fighting games. These are the people that we're basically putting our potential future enjoyment. The responsibility is in their hands. And they're kind of showing that they don't deserve that responsibility. So I don't know, man. We'll have to see. I did wind up going a little bit longer than I wanted. I was hoping to keep this closer to like somewhere in between 10 to 15 minutes. I went a little bit overboard. But yeah, there was a bit too much anger in there. That was my problem. So I'm just going to dip right now. Thank you for listening. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.